Alright, so I had this little series I wanted to make where I made the playlist levels in BattleBlock Theater. Unfortunately, I never got past uploading a fourth video despite me having made 4 additional levels. I've now decided to revive this series, but before we can get into making new levels, I realized some of my previous ones need some reworking to be more enjoyable and less awkward. Before we get into that, however, I also wanted to edit and definitively explain some rules I have made for the series. From now on, each level will use a combination of 2 different objects to use as the level's main gameplay, and will always include water since I want every level to have a ocean-like aesthetic. Instead of limiting myself to just 2 objects per level like before, I'll be more flexible and use any other objects as long as they don't pertain to a level's main gimmick. My first level is going to be the minimum level size, and levels will progressively get bigger until the last 2 levels, which will be the max level size. To improve my overall level design, I will now come into each episode with a plan of what objects I will use and how I'll use them instead of always winging it, since that didn't really result in very good levels. But don't worry, I will still do a bit of design on the fly. Anyway, I'm going to quickly explain the reworks I've done for the first 3 levels I've already uploaded, since I don't think it would be very fair to make a new video on each one. For the first level, I realized it's hard to do much of anything with the smallest level dimensions, so I thought instead of having very short linear platforms with awkward jumps, it could be remade into a level the player would need to traverse all around. I wanted the level to be centered around temporary blocks, so what's better than filling the level with them? This forces the player to keep moving, which uses the little space available very well. I can't do anything crazy with hiding the pie, which, mind you, is supposed to be the hardest collectible to get in level, so I put it right above the exit, giving a slight challenge if the player collected all the strawberries, since they could slip up and end the level without getting the pie. Otherwise, the level provides minimal challenge and simple platforming, which I am overall pleased with. The previous version of this level had some alright ideas using the moving fluffs in tandem with lots of dangerous spikes. However, the level was mostly awkward to maneuver through. The interesting mechanics were there, however. So in this new revamp, I used the same theme of moving platforms and spikes to create 2 different layers. The first one is simple, where the player has easy jumps from one moving platform to the other. There's an easy yet perilous jump down in the second layer, which now is the player trying to keep up with the moving platform as they jump over lots of spikes to get the last strawberry. I put a checkpoint at the end since it forces the player to now retrace their steps, which naturally increases the level length. I also put the pie in a spot that makes it hard to get without dying, though there isn't much punishment for dying in this game anyway unless you play insane mode, which would restart the level from the beginning, but that's beside the point. This produces a way better ending than the annoying clusterfuck that I made in the previous iteration. Like, I have no idea what I was thinking when I made this. Even my past self had trouble getting through it, so I guess I had pretty low standards for what a fun level was. Anyway, this version is a major upgrade in level design in my most humble opinion. Although the levels are starting to finally get a bit bigger, I somehow was able to make this level feel incredibly claustrophobic and clunky. I wasn't doing anything unique mechanic-wise that I haven't done in previous levels, and the addition of cats and randomly moving blocks didn't provide anything interesting or challenging. This revamp went through a couple iterations of layouts, but overall I found it still wasn't enough space to be able to divide the level how I wanted. I decided on a more linear level, with the cat's projectiles being either helpful, hindering, or a bit of both. This resulted in some fun platforming where the player had to jump on balls and bubbles to avoid hazards, but the small level size led to the version also being cramped. The level I'm showing right now even went through a couple edits, though the platforming still felt strange and the level was a bit ugly looking. I originally would have been fine with this, but after creating the 4th level, I knew I could recreate this level with a stronger theme. One thing I really liked was that to get the pie, the player had to double jump off a thrown ball, which I felt made the player think they did something smart. It then only made sense to simplify the level to only be about jumping on balls and nothing more. Thus the final version kind of looks like a volleyball court on the beach. It's a battle between left cat and right cat, and unfortunately it's a stalemate as neither one of them can get the ball over the net. That doesn't stop the game from being incredibly heated and entertaining, as the audience are constantly bumping into each other and fighting over which cat is the best player. While that's happening, all you need to do is use the pitiful throws to get to each side and collect the strawberries and exit through the bottom of the net before things get too rowdy. Alright, now that we had our fun, here's how the level works. You spawn on this pillar and use the balls to jump to the top corner of the level, or you jump down below and have to use the balls to get back up. The bottom jumps are harder than the top ones, so I thought a clever way to make the pie hard to get was that a checkpoint would be triggered so the player would be forced to have to make the jump if they wanted the pie. Otherwise, the player can just choose to die for the strawberry on the right if they don't want to make the jump. And just to make sure the player isn't confused, I put ominous floating question mark signs around the general area of when the ball is in the right position to bounce on. In the end, it's a very straightforward but much more fun and open level than before. Alright, now that we've revamped those previous levels, it's time to get into the main event for this episode and show you what I have for the 4th level and what I'm going to do to fix it. Unfortunately, I lost both the original level save and the recording of me making it, so just imagine like a really bad ice level with lots of jump pads and a cat who would constantly freeze you while you struggle to complete the level. Pretty lame, right? The ice cat does seem like a fun mechanic to play with though, so let's get right into making a new one. The plan will be as follows. Since the ice cats are something I really want to put a focus on, the two objects I'll be using to complement them are slippery ice blocks and these beasts, or Rackalope as they're called, which are unkillable, chase the player, and are instant kills. Basically, I think it would be fun to have a somewhat open platforming space where ice projectiles are constantly raining down in random directions on the player, possibly freezing them and making them easy pickings for the beasts. I also noticed from the initial version of this level that when you're frozen you move incredibly fast on the ice, which will be another chaotic and fun factor in the level. So, I'm going to refine how many ice projectiles should fall down and in what directions, utilizing the fans and teleporters of course, creating some engaging platforming challenges with those projectiles and ice platforms in mind, and somehow introduce these Rackalope to provide a consequence for getting frozen. To get started, I created the ice rain mechanics using ice cats to shoot the ice, obviously, teleporters to disperse them around the level, and fans to make sure the ice always goes into the teleporter and doesn't fling anywhere I don't want it to go. Then, I thought it was best to start the rest of the level design by figuring out where the start and end point should be. I want to make sure that the player is protected from getting instantly frozen upon spawning in, so it made sense to have the spawn and end be at the bottom underneath a layer of protective blocks. I knew I wanted the player to traverse the 3 corners I laid out, so despite not knowing how the player would move through the level, I got started with blocking out the platforms. When I tried making levels in the past, I'd always get myself stuck or get too attached to what I had placed down. This time, I tried creating the general shape of the level swiftly without getting bogged down on all the details. After testing the ice rain for a little bit, I felt that my concept worked really well to make jumps unforgiving if timed incorrectly. This meant though that I had to make sure not to do anything too complicated for platforming, given how frustrating it can be to jump around with the chance to be frozen at any second. It probably isn't a problem now, but difficulty can always be a pain to balance. I try to keep in mind that as the creator, I know the level better and can complete it easier than a new player would. I do plan on having a friend play through all my levels before I publish the playlist to circumvent this, but until then, I'll balance the difficulty as best as I can. Now for the main danger. Sure, I could just use water, but having these raccoons gives a slight chance of escaping death, which is way more fun and adds a lot more to the theme. Plus, like, look at these guys. They're just adorable. I was originally going to have 2 on each side, but that would mean there's no chance of surviving, so 1 is more than enough. I also like how having the spawn at the bottom makes it obvious to the player that, hey, those things right there want you dead, so you better be paying attention, stupid. Though, then you may ask, where's the water in this level to make it ocean-themed? Well, that brings in a great philosophical question of whether or not you could deem ice as water. Sure, in terms of the game's logic, ice and water are 2 totally different objects, but ice is just frozen water. Water in a different state of matter. If water is ice, then is ice water? A square is a rectangle, but not all rectangles are squares. Where does ice initially come from? Did you drown or suffocate? Do you drink or do you eat snow? Is ice a large collection of small ice crystals? Can ice be counted as water? Water never froze. Damn, I'm really thirsty now. Anyway, I figured out a spot for the water where the player has a chance to get frozen and slide right in. I know I wanted the player to have the ability to survive their death, but this added an additional challenge to getting the final strawberry and blocked out a nice little place for the pie. I noticed I needed to keep the water usage minimal though, since the ice would sink right in and not bounce around. The level has a clear path to follow now, though the level feels a little bit empty. In terms of functionality and mechanics, I would say it's done, but obviously that is only half the level. So, off camera, I did all the boring decorating to make the level a lot more fun to look at. This includes some signs, a colorful cool background, and some nice black blocks, which are a great contrast to the bright white ice. By the way, did you know you can't place plants on ice? I wanted to go for an evergreen theme, but oh well. The decorating also gave me a chance to make some jumps even easier and be more forgiving, like giving some platforms a little lip to catch you if you were just about to make the jump but were frozen in midair. To offset the adjustment though, I decided to provide less space on the bottom so the player will most likely always die to the Rackalope if they fall down. So never mind that whole chance to survive thing I was talking about earlier. To reduce tedium, I placed a checkpoint in the middle since I realized the player kept spawning back to the level's entrance every time they died. It didn't really take too long to get back anyway, but reducing the amount of time the player wastes is something I strive for in level design. Finally, I tweaked the pie to be more forgiving to obtain, and it's done. Level 4, the Arctic. In the end, I think the redesign worked out great. Ice platforms and projectiles force the player to be patient during all the chaos, and doesn't overstay its welcome because of the short level length. The only major downside is how loud the game is with all the constant teleporting and shooting. but there's only so much I can do about that if I don't want to sacrifice the challenge. This leads me to believe I've created a level that I'm actually proud of. I might be getting a little ahead of myself though, because this is just a tiny level in a 15 level playlist, and a simple level editor, in a simple game that is almost 10 years old. But hey, I got a video series to complete, so if being overly proud helps, by God, I will suck my own dick and enjoy it if I have to.